way to do a review internally. That's one way, obviously works very well. At Bethesda, as I said, we started out with a team of 8 and we ended up with a team of 230 people. And that was essentially, we have about 1,500 members at Bethesda, okay? And so 230 was a reasonable 20%. So actually get 20% of your entire membership when 400 of them are over 78. It's pretty good going because most of those wouldn't come out in the evenings and stuff like that. Okay? We have 1,000 households and 1,500 members. Our ratio is 1.5. So to get that low, you actually have to have a lot of people living on their own. Now, they don't exactly live on their own because they've actually got 2 or 3 staff in the other part of the house who don't come to church, but it's counted as living on their own. It's a slightly different world. So, if that's the internal side, the external side. So, I was using an example of the Salvation Army for Palm Beach County, so we'll continue with that one for the moment. So, I had to take out some of the content in this just because of certain comments from certain people and things like that they prefer not to be published. But we essentially created a great big spreadsheet, and you're not allowed to see the content, but essentially 3 pages of this tracked everything they did against all the functions that they had, and then at the very detailed level, like the level 3 down, it would be who does what, and then the next level up it was what were the issues and what were the strengths, and the next level up above that was, so it's almost like going from who did what for feeding, then who did what within outreach, and then who did what within the church itself. So there were these 3 tiers. And so we mapped the whole of that. We worked out what the issues were, we worked out what the strengths were, we then actually worked out where we needed to make a change, and we actually divvied that up into projects to start with, just to give us some scale as to what was required. Now, we had walked in doing this, it took about 9 months to do this review, and they said, well, what is it going to cost right at the beginning? And I said, how do I know what it's going to cost right at the beginning? But they said, okay, well, we've got about $1 million. Okay, so we did the whole thing for real, and the answer was about 45 million. Okay? They had a budget of 1 million, and we had a 45 on the other side. So one of the things we had to do was actually go, okay, what is really, really important? How do you define what's important? We then went through and said, if we did this project, what would be the impact? Not the impact on the organisation, but the impact on the people who were in need, who were going to be helped. And we then used the impact. Where can we actually spend $1 million in the most effective way to get there? So the bits I'm allowed to show you from this are Palm Beach County. What are the differences? You go to the West Coast and Palm Beach County is very small, but on the East Coast it's a pretty large county. I think it's the largest county in Florida. The dollar disparity. Mar-a-Lago is right next to a road called Southern that runs east-west. It's the far east end of it. In Palm Beach you have loads and loads of multi-billionaires. You drive 15 miles along Southern, you don't have to turn left or right, and you can find some of the poorest people in the whole of America. Okay? So within 15 miles, the disparity is enormous. Okay? These are usually workers on sugarcane farms and things like that. The high population growth. Part of that is there's a lot of Hispanic people in the south of the county, south of Florida, and that's where Palm Beach County is, and they tend to have bigger families. There's also immigration coming in. Most of it, to be fair, is actually legal. It's, you don't have the problems with Mexico and things like that. And multiple language, lots of Spanish, but a lot of Portuguese, a lot of people coming in from Brazil, and then a lot of Creole coming through as well. Okay, I think it's right that the Episcopal Church uses 8 languages for services in Florida on every Sunday. So it spreads out, but the big numbers are obviously the ones we know. In terms of the needs, complete lack of affordable housing, lack of short-term shelters, significant mental health issues, this is substance abuse, alcoholics. Bethesda doesn't actually run AA-type meetings, but it provides a facility for the AA to run their meetings, and they probably have 8 meetings a week covering 300 people. Okay, and there are 2 more churches in Palm Beach who are doing similar things. So if you have lots of money, then unfortunately drugs and alcohol seem to go part of the equation. The third grade reading, which I was talking about, limited safe havens. A really good example of a safe haven that works was a community centre run by the Salvation Army. About 100 children every day after school would go there, and they would be there from 3:30 to 6:30 for 3 hours. During that time, they would be fed with a hot meal. They'd be given a snack to take home. There were some education classes to help with homework and things like that. They ran a sports program very biased towards basketball, but very successful, like won state cups and things like that at different levels and things like that. But the most important impact was, here's 80 children out of a very small area of, say, 200 children. Out of those 80, 1 in a year got knifed or shot. Out of the other group, about 40. So it was 20 times better because that community centre was there. Now that's the impact. That's how to measure whether you're doing something right, not the process. And that's what you should be focusing on with your strategies. Difficult to smile when that's the topic, but the underlying message with the smile is work out the impact, and that's where your strategy belongs. Okay? Limited youth programs, 200,000 poverty out of 1.5 million in the county. Okay, it's a high proportion. There's much worse places, but there's still a lot when you consider how many wealthy people there are down there. Now this is the sanitised version, so I'm not sure if you can read it, but there's a Salvation Army church. So you had the church, and they had like internal things like finance and stuff like that, and they had sort of social services type departments. A very interesting one was, it wasn't a halfway shelter, it was if you had not committed a violent crime and you were in the last 6 months of your term in prison, instead of being in prison, you actually went to their facility. And you were locked down at night. Okay. During the day, they would help you get a job, you had a bracelet. You had to call in with the phone from the place where you were working once an hour on a day. Okay. You couldn't use any other phone to actually prove where you were geographically. So they had 2 ways to actually check where you were. They would help you get a job, they would help you get a bank account, they would help set you up, basically, so that when you came out, it was about 5 times more successful than the prison bureau itself in terms of people doing similar things and not going there. So again, that was an impact. Okay? It was because they put a lot of effort into the social service piece of enabling them and then basically hand-holding them for another 6 months after they'd actually gone out. Like, come once a week. They did Bible study once a week. Okay? And it was interesting to see how their personality changed. I was there for 2.5 years, and you meet the same people over that time, and you see their personality changing through doing that. So we actually measured all of these things against all the departments, what were the issues, what were the strengths, and things like that. Whoops. So, why is there an elephant there? My wife and I like elephants. Okay? She has a little jewellery that's elephants. We have loads of elephant ornaments around our house, including lamps that have elephant ears and stuff like that to pick them up and everything like that. We even adopted 2 elephants. They're in Kenya. Our apartment's not quite big enough for them. Okay? Okay. One of them is 2 years old and one of them is now 10 years old. We simply helped fund them. But the story behind that was that an elephant is killed by poachers. The baby's there, it's like 3 months old or whatever. They pick it up, they take it in, they care for it. It goes through 5 different stages in locations that are fairly adjunct, and then it's released back into the wild. And they've been doing it for over 40 years, and it's so successful that when an elephant is released, it usually goes and finds a herd because it actually knows some of the elephants that were already there. Okay? And then when an elephant, a female, has a baby, it tends to bring them back to show off their baby elephant to the people who care for them. So it works really well. So elephants do a lot of heavy lifting. Heavy lifting means you're going to do some work instead of us. Okay? So each time one of this comes up, there's something for you to do. I assume everybody's got a pen. You need one of these. Some of those. Okay. And you need to be in pairs. My definition of a pair is 2 people. It is not 3 people or 1 person, okay?
There are 4 teams, so I think we're good on the pairing possibility.
Everyone have a piece of paper? Very good. Okay. You're all in pairs. You need to be able to look straight in the eyes. Chose to me. Okay? Keep your eyes open, but look at the other person. Alright? You need a piece of paper and you need a pen. Or pen. Break them into pairs. And we're going to ask you to do something. This takes 10 seconds. I do mean 10 seconds, not 11 seconds. Okay? If you were doing a painting, from here, just below the neck, up is a portrait. A portrait is not the whole body. Okay? You have 10 seconds to draw a portrait of the person in front of you. Go.
This isn't going to be fun.
Yeah. 7 seconds. You're late, put your pen down. Share. Share.
Captured.
10 seconds is not a lot of time.
I'm not good at drawing.
You didn't know you could do that.
I like your eyes.
Yeah, you can turn back. Fun and laughter, very powerful for both bonding, but it's been proved, are extremely good for creative thinking. So when you're doing your strategy, stop being serious all the time and see how you can have a bit of fun. Okay? So even an Englishman can have some fun. It's not so difficult. If you want to go back to the seats, you can. And don't forget, every time there's an elephant, you have to do something.
Yeah.
All right. How do we find out? I keep using the example of the Salvation Army. They had 3 main facilities, which were what they would call a church, and they have community centres and things like that associated with whatever. And we actually went out and bought democratic reports. They cost about $200 to $300 each. Okay, so we did 6. And you take one location, you do a demographic report for a 5-mile radius and then for a 15-mile radius. And really depends on whether all of these weren't in the middle of a very big city. I was in the middle of a big city. If you're in a church in the middle of Chicago, I wouldn't bother with 15 miles. I would stick with 5 miles, okay? Because it's just going to change too much, all right? And it gives you a lot of information if you actually get the right ones, okay? We also went off and talk to the school board in terms of their strategic and performance reports. I'm sorry to say that the Palm Beach County one is not very useful. It was a poster about 3 feet by 2'6", and when I asked for the report to go with it, they said there wasn't one. Okay? Well, that's not a strategy, that's a piece of marketing. All right? Town, city, county strategic plans and targets. Really interesting to actually go and talk to sort of the administrator for a town and things like this, and actually see what's going on and what they're planning to do. You can learn an enormous amount about your environment from what people like that are actually planning to do. Okay? Because some of this stuff is 5 or 10 years out because it's infrastructure things and stuff like that. They're trying in Palm Beach, trying to take all the poles that have the telephone, the cable television, the internet and stuff like that. They're undergrounding everything and then taking all the poles away. One, because we're in a hurricane zone and therefore it's way more effective, but this is very expensive. Right? And then the metrics to actually go with it. So quantify what happens today. Numbers, not grades. And we'll talk about facility, like plan maintenance for your facilities. You'll see down the road, you cannot have a real strategy unless you have a real financial plan for the same period of time. So 5-year strategy needs a 5-year financial plan. Okay? You're allowed to know.
Just a quick thing, and you probably know this, but the Episcopal Church does demographic reports that you can find on their website for your parish, and then in a 15-mile radius of your neighborhood. It's right on the Episcopal Church website.
It's actually 15 in the tribe.
Okay, 15-minute drive, yeah, from where you're, yes, it's very good.
They are very good, I agree. I've also found that when you go and buy some of these commercial reports, their granularity is a lot better. Okay. So we'll come back to the plan maintenance side when we're further along the way. In terms of quantifying stuff, here's an example from Bethesda. Bethesda's $3.5 million budget, 1,500 members, 1,000 family church, with average Sunday attendance in the season, that's winter. At the moment we're probably 650, 700, and in the summer down to about 250. Okay? It's a huge difference because we tend to be where the people have got 2 or 3 or 4 or in some cases 5 or 6 homes. Moving your shoes around must be a real pain in the neck. Okay, so as I was saying, and these are real numbers from last year. This came out of the plan for this year, looking back last year. So it gave away $580,000. That was really easy to find. Okay. The metric numbers of how often we do something or for how many people were much more difficult. And it's like, okay, we need to improve in that area. We need to really understand what we're doing. So an example is the high school students supported by the mentor program, 17 of them. So sophomore, junior and senior years, if someone gets into this program as a sophomore, we will support them for 7 years. Those 3 at high school and 4 more years at college. You have to get the right grades. We moved away from doing 50 children down to sort of 5 or 6 a year. Therefore, that actually means that if you're looking for some money because you don't have a full scholarship from wherever you're going, then we'll give you 3,000 to 5,000 a year. And this is a commitment for 4 years for that one child. So the numbers, that's why the numbers are not huge in terms of numbers. This is already a lot of money. And then you get someone who comes through the program, who essentially joined the program as a sophomore, who was living in the back of a car with his mother and 3 other children. So there was actually 5 of them in the car. And that was the case for about a year. And then, not through us, through another agency, someone found them an apartment and basically had a 1-bedroom apartment for 5, 1 adult and 4 children to live in. So it wasn't wonderful, but it was a lot better than the back of a car. Okay? This is the back of a car in a scrapyard. It's not a car they can drive around in. Okay? So he came from that, and he ends up getting a full scholarship to MIT. We had 3 people, all lay members, all volunteers, helping to mentor him. One on the sciences side, he was really good, so the person was having to do homework before he went to see them all the time, stuff like that, just to try to keep up. One in terms of what you actually need in your application process, like you need to be doing some volunteer work, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing that. Let's actually go and find something. And another one was, you're great at sciences, you haven't got a clue about the arts, let's actually take you to the theatre, let's actually take you to a museum and things like that, and trying to stretch his mind. And he was bright enough to get there. The other 16 aren't as good as that, but they're getting there. So that's the program there. I talked about the meals piece. We don't do that. St. George's in Riviera Beach was a very, very low-income environment. Lots of homeless, lots of unemployed, and things like that. And so our little bit of the pie was 16,500 meals last year. I think they actually do more than 100,000 total, but they have other people that are helping, stuff like that. We have a port ministry. Palm Beach Port has a lot of container ships that come in. The crews on board are not even allowed on the land, okay? Because they don't, for immigration purposes. We actually worked with the port, and now they've actually fenced off the piece and put in a porta cabin, which we help finance, and now they can actually go there, and it gives them telephone lines, it gives them email, or sort of internet access and things like that. They're given toiletries, they're given magazines, they're given sort of hats and scarves and things like that. And one of our deacons goes with some of the volunteers first thing in the morning or late in the evening and actually does a Eucharist on board with them. And he registers all of that, so there was 251 of those last year. So that's the sort of thing where if it wasn't already happening, we would never have started it. But because it's there and because the impact is so good, we have continued it. And the cost is almost negligible. Okay? The hats are made by people in the church and stuff like that. It's really interesting seeing a really big 6'6" guy who weighs 300 pounds sitting there and knitting away on a hat. It just changes your mind about what people might do. Okay? So there's some sort of metrics. All of this comes out of a document which is the Bethesda Strategy 2020 Plan. It is online. You simply go to the Bethesda website, and so you can see all of it now. You don't have to wait for 2 weeks. It looks like this, okay? And inside there are, I don't know how many pages. 36 pages of, this is the plan for 1 year. Okay? So here's a real worked example. Now, the piece at the beginning, which is, here's our strategy, is very small, because we have a separate document that is kept internally. Okay? But this is our plan, which we actually make sure that everybody in Palm Beach and everybody in Palm Beach County actually knows about. And by going out and telling them, and we've been doing this for 4 years now, the number of people who now come to us and say, how can we help? Can we do a partnership? Can we do this? I see you're doing that. If we did that, could we actually join the two together? And so this partnership side is starting to come because we are sharing the information instead of holding it internally. Before that, they never put anything outside. It's like sort of confidential, written across everything, and you can't share it. So that's there. So in terms of documents, you can find that. You can find a report, like annual meeting report. It tells you all the things that happened last year. Okay? This one's much more interesting, is where we're going, our vision and things like this. And then we'll get to strategic fundraising, and we have a generosity brochure like this. That's not up there yet. You can come and look at these. I have a viewpoint in life. If I put things here, and they're here at the end, it means you're honest. And if they're not here at the end, it means someone's a thief. I'm English, I'm blunt, okay? So, you're welcome to look. There's one of those, there's two of those, and there's four of those. 4, 5, 6, 7 should be here at the end, okay? But the plan piece, you can see all of it online, okay? A lot of the things we've been talking about, someone here said they had done renewal works, is that right? Yes, okay. We're in the very early stages, so you're ahead of us, okay? All the metrics we were doing was like sort of, what are the ministries, how big are they, what assets do we have? We have a church, a rectory, a vicarage, and a retail shop, so 4 prime bits. The church includes offices and conference rooms and parish hall and stuff like that, but 4 separate things. We have 1,500 members, we have 27 full-time staff, we have 3 full-time clergy, we have 2 assisting priests who are non-stipendiary, that means free, and we have 2 deacons who are part-time who are non-stipendiary as well. So when the whole lot is there at 11 o'clock, they're fighting for space behind the altar. So there's a lot there. But one of the things we didn't have was, so that's all the sort of physical, financial stuff, but where are we in terms of our faith? And so we went looking and we came to the same conclusion that renewal works was really good. And it's very interesting. Where have we been? Where are we now? Where do we call to go? And how will we get there? Sounds like strategy, isn't it? Okay? And so we want to put that on top of it. And that's a very, requires a lot of resource to really make this work in a church of our size. Alan was talking about this earlier in terms of, here's a little questionnaire, put it at the end of the pew, people take 5 minutes in the middle of service, put it in the basket and collect it, and we go from there. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. And then the other side of it was, well, where are we in terms of not fundraising, but in terms of generosity? Generosity is a core aspect of our faith. Really trying to make the difference between this and a commercial strategy in terms of revenue streams and things like that. So we use some outside consulting groups. They're actually here, Horizon Stewardship, some of you may know them. They use a tool, I'm not sure if it was Wealth Engine or something else, that basically went, okay, here's 1,000 homes, let's actually do a check in terms of their wealth, and that's pretty significant in our case. And then we actually did a survey where they actually put it together and then we put it out online or people could fill it out. But basically, it was asking about where did generosity fit in their faith? What did they feel generous towards? Where would they give? At what level would they give? And things like that. we got about 15% of the households, 150 out of 1,000, to actually do this. We were told that that's really good going, but I was really disappointed. I was hoping we would do better than that. But I'm told by having looked at some of this stuff, the only survey type thing you can get above 50% in an Episcopal church is when you're working out what sort of rector you want when you have to get a new rector. And then everybody wants to say. And they're not all the same. Okay?
Yeah.
And then partnerships in collaborative work, I was talking about that. It's almost impossible to get really good, really positive partnerships unless you actually share some information. So 4 years of doing this, of sharing our plan going forwards, is now starting to actually get other people are coming to us instead of us always having to go out. And it helps because, like, we'll talk about vision a little later on, but to give you a story, because I don't want to do a negative story there, this is a negative story. When we were doing some work last year, we had a group together, and one of the people said, look, I live in West Palm, which can still be very expensive. You still have a $5 million home, or you can have a $250,000 home, depending on where you are in West Palm. And I told my friends that we go to Bethesda, and they said, well, why do you go there? That's that fancy church for white, posh, rich people. And it was like, she said, and I was kind of, oh. And she said, what I really like is next time I do that, after we've gone through some of the things that we're talking about here, that they say, oh, that's that really friendly church that does so much in outreach in terms of helping people and things like that. And I said, that's a wonderful vision. And the really bad bit is, this person's description of Bethesda was probably 100% right 30 years ago. It was almost a private club. It's changed enormously, okay? We've changed from being 100+% Caucasian to being 85%. We've changed from being 100% wealthy to being 75% wealthy. Your house is worth more than $1 million wealthy. So the church is changing, and it's really great to be part of this, which is, it has so many good things, but it has so many bad things from the past. And you can actually be part of changing that to be better for the future. So vision. A big dream of where your church will be in 10 to 15 years. Forget how you get there. Forget what are the problems. Forget how much is it going to cost. Forget all the things that get in the way, all the hurdles. Read lots of management books that talk about the hurdles. Okay? If you want a vision, say where you want to be, but actually be sensible. We have solved world hunger single-handedly is not a vision. It's a fairy tale. Yes? So, some real examples from studies, projects over the last 3 years. Okay? So I have 3 of them. We will establish a successful after-school and summer camp program for K through 3rd grade children to address 3rd grade reading challenges in our community. We will establish a successful after-school and summer camp program. What? To address 3rd grade reading challenges in our community. Why? A vision answers those two. It doesn't need to answer anything else. Okay? We will grow our building financial reserves, like an endowment, to a level that will deliver income adequate to cover all building and maintenance preservation costs, to free our annual contributions from the outside burden of caring for our legacy buildings and grounds, and so free up resources for ministry. We build a big endowment for the building that pays for all of that, and at the moment that's being paid for by your annual campaign. Your annual campaign doesn't actually have to pay for that anymore, therefore all of that can go into ministry. Or we stop having bigger and bigger deferred maintenance problem and we actually catch up on it because we actually have guaranteed funds. Okay? These are real ones. Okay? This is not, I just came up. We will, working with other organisations, provide permanent affordable housing for the 100 critically homeless people here. Here was Palm Beach County. Okay? There are a lot more than that, but there are about 100 that essentially go through what's called critical homeless, which is, I'm sleeping rough, I'm taking drugs or alcohol or both, I get into trouble, I'm put in prison or something like that, I come out and I repeat the cycle. You repeat it more than 3 times in 5 years, and that's how they classify it, okay? I didn't know any of this stuff until I started looking into this area. So I've done strategy in lots of areas that I haven't got a clue about. Education, homelessness. I have no medical qualifications to save my life. I don't even know what the drugs are that I take. I don't take any normally. My wife has to tell me which ones to take and things like that. So this one actually has a number, and I wouldn't normally put a number there, but it was like, if you didn't put that number, people were going to go, is this 50, 100, 1,000, 2,000, and then explaining what critically homeless people meant. Then, like the gentleman who's now gone, like it was, we were getting people to truly understand one vision. So here's 3 different organizations addressing 3 different problems, okay? And in each case, it took about 6 to 8 weeks to craft these, working with people, talking, like taking all the information in terms of what we've done in the inventory, in terms of all the metrics and things like that, and actually come out with a, where are you really going to focus? Bethesda has 64 ministries, okay? It's 8 ministry groups and they broke down. So worship is a ministry group, evangelism, outreach, things like that. And then you take outreach and you go, okay, there's a feeding program, the education program, the mental program, stuff like that. You add them all together and there are 64. And the conversation I keep having with the rector is 64 is too many, because it's like you're polishing a surface, but we're never actually getting rid of the woodworm underneath. If we actually had 25 instead of 64, you could put so much more effort into it and achieve so much more. So the focus is what you want. So a clear idea of where we're going to go. On Friday, Thursday afternoon is the first of them, and then on Friday morning, there are 3 strategy presentations, discussion groups as part of the main conference. Okay. The first one and the third one are being run by other people, and the second one is being run by me Friday morning. The slide where I said this is strategy all in one go, and this one are the only 2 that you will actually see on Friday. Friday is totally different. Friday is about thinking in a different way. Today we're really focusing on the process and some of the techniques and some of the examples. On Friday it's really talking about a fundamental difference. And this slide is a good introduction to that. So, I didn't do this. This is way too good for me. It comes from someone called Amy Webb from the Future Today Institute, and it came out of the Harvard Business Review. Okay? So the logic was, if you just had a line on the bottom, like the 1.2, 2.5 timeline, you say tactics, strategy, vision, whatever, it's not right, because in a commercial organization, you define your tactics where you know almost everything. Then as you move out to your strategy, you know less. And as you move out to your vision, you know less again. And then it gets even less. So, as it says up here, because of certainty and uncertainty, they work outwards with hard data. So it's almost like, I know where I am today, but in 2 to 5 years, I'm not quite sure where it's going to be. I don't know where the path is. And so there isn't a line. It's this code of, there's a lot of where, in faith, and this, I think, is a fundamental difference in strategic planning for faith, is that it's based on certainty. We believe in God. We believe in salvation. We believe in the love and the grace and the forgiveness of God. So our strategy is almost working backwards as to how can we actually develop our faith and how can we move this organization that we are part of to go forwards. Now you still have to do the practical stuff for your individual church or organization, things like that, but it's very different. Okay?
One sort of recommendation, practical, regarding this kind of thing is there's a book that came out the last couple of years by Todd Bolsinger called Canoeing the Mountains. If you're not familiar with it, I could not recommend it more. It talks specifically about strategic planning for church, but really it's the best book on leadership and strategy that I've read. Canoeing the Mountains. Well, later on there's a quote, but this kind of, this slide in particular, connotes that for me.
Like in the Harvard Business Review, all of that's in there, and this is sort of in words. This is not in there at all. Okay, that this is my viewpoint, changing business strategy based on my experience. Mission and values. This is the Bethesda one again. So that's the graphic that we produced. I thought it was pretty good, and then I was talking to someone who was part of the strategy planning team for the National Cathedral, and they showed me their graphic, and you'll see it in a minute. It's like, wow, your graphic artist gets paid a lot more than ours does. Okay.
And just to reiterate for folks, in case it wasn't clear, this entire thing will be available online behind the seat paywall for you, like within the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. So for Bethesda, we find our mission to be basically in 3 parts: is to experience the clear and strong presence of God, to understand and spread Christ's teachings through collective worship, learning, and service. We started out with this bit based on new people coming to the church. And when we have like a newcomers process, and we would ask them, why did you come? And some as when we drove past and we were church shopping, it looked attractive. It's sort of supposedly Gothic. It's poured concrete, but it's Gothic style. And some was we heard about it, and some we came for the music. We have a fully 24-member professional choir. Okay, every single person is paid. Every single one is a professional musician. They're not with us all the time. They're just with us for certain things, but very, very high standard and a brilliant organ. A lot of them said it was because we actually felt God in that place. You like the idea of a professional choir?
Well,
Who was that? We've got a good one.
yeah, he's professional.
And another one was that when we did this was all the way back in 2012, that's what was really coming through. Today we might actually change that, because when we actually talked to the new people coming in, July 1 to December 31st last year, last 6 months, we had 42 new members join the church. Okay? And we probably lost 12 through deaths or moving away and things like that. I think only 1 left because they were unhappy, so that's a pretty good ratio, like a net increase of 30 people. And we're doing that about every 6 months at the moment. But almost everyone now is going, well, it's just so friendly, everybody's so welcoming. And I'll talk about how we actually made that change. But it's like, Bethesda as a place is changing as to who comes, who's a member, why they're there, what they do, and things like that. So from my perspective, I can't say enough about Bethesda. Is it perfect? Absolutely not, okay? I love being a lecturer, and they don't let me be a lecturer every week, okay? I get about once a month, so they've got that piece of scheduling wrong as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so we have the mission here, then we have 8 values in pairs around the outside, and then we did a trick as part of strategic planning. You might want to give this a go for yourself. I said, if you had to stop, you aren't going to do this, but if you had to stop doing everything apart from one thing, what would that be? And we called it our core objective. And our core objective is collective sacramental worship. And therefore, with one exception, every single service has a Eucharist. And it's a big part of the worship. It's pretty formal in terms of how it's done. We have we call it middle way. It's sort of a meal. Here's one of 8 options, from Bible study to yoga to interpreting films from a Christian viewpoint to a speaker coming in to actually talk about something going on in the community. You can do any of these, and then we finish with compline in the evening, like 10-minute service, and there's no Eucharist there. So that's the one exception in the whole week. The Tuesday morning service at 8 o'clock in our garden chapel, the 12:30 service on a Friday, all the services on Sunday, all have the Eucharist as part of it. So it was just a way of, if you say that, and then when we're working out our resources going forwards, if that isn't really near the top, then why?
So, and it may just be me, but that you say that, and that was what the core priority of your mission and values was for the church. So I think that, and maybe this is just me, but I think a lot of us go into this process of strategic thinking about how to pull these older members of our congregations out of that core value and change what their values are so that they are more outreach and more mission oriented. And I think that's a really, really good point when that can be satisfied. And if that is the most important thing, because there are a lot of times, like even at our small church, where we're like, we spend 2/3 of our budget maintaining this 120-year-old historic building and paying a full-time rector for 45 people to come on Sunday. And I don't know, I feel like that's like revelatory. Like that's okay that is the core value, and that if you can figure out the right way to satisfy that, then all of the other things that you want to do apart from that. So you're not fighting against the people.
No, I agree with you.
You know what I mean?
And in 2012, it was right. It was absolutely bang on.
Yes.
Sometime between now and 2024, the next 5 years, this will change.
Yes.
And you'll see in some of the strategic priorities we talk about as we move on, that going forwards, it's evangelism and outreach.
Right.
That's where we're putting our efforts.
Because we acknowledged it and fully supported it.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think
Good.
it speaks also to the cycle, right? If we harken back to sort of the try at the beginning, it's the cycle where you have the plan, you do it, the 5, the 15, the 10, the 2, and you're back again. And so you're reevaluating in that context.
But it's such a different approach, I think, than especially like for younger members of the congregation who I feel like it's a constant struggle with a lot of the older members in the like we're trying to pull them in a different direction all of the time when maybe that isn't the right approach at all. And if we acknowledge, well, you are the majority of our church. This is what your core values are. And maybe if we focus on that, fulfill that, sustain that financially, we can move on to other things, and you'll see the importance of that because you're satisfied in this part of what really.
But I think you're spot on that's almost like old church. In 2012, Bethesda was an old church. Okay.
There's a lot of churches that still are.
Okay.
Majority, right?
But the way we came at it was, instead of changing that now, let's change this sort of almost under the radar by defining strategic priorities associated with outreach and evangelism that would gradually bring in the resources into those areas and take us in a different direction. And that's actually what's leading to the church changing. The people who are attracted by the evangelism and outreach are the ones coming in. And if we're losing someone because they're not happy, it's because we're doing less of this. Okay? But to do this in one go wasn't going to work. So it's like, okay, we've got our priorities for the next 2-3 years, let's do that, and then we'll come back and go, we need to change that. Like, being very cynical, if we built our building endowment the way we're hoping to over the next 5 years, it then actually frees up everything else to go in whatever direction you want to go. And the new people coming in are way more interested in actually doing something rather than attending a finance committee meeting. Okay?
But
They want to be out there.
Are comfortable doing it.
Yes.
They feel like there are resources available to spend for that. I'm sorry, this is like
No, I think that's a really good point.
it's like a revelation for me.
So there's one example for you.
Can I just pop in with something there? I think one of the things that you lifted up in your statement, in your question, was the struggle of using a traditional budget as an instrument to explain how you're living into that vision that you're trying to accomplish. And this is one of those places where moving to a narrative budget can be extraordinarily helpful. So instead of saying, okay, half of our giving goes to maintaining the building, and another 2/5 goes to clergy. But if you divide it up into how is our building utilized for these missional opportunities, how does our clergy prioritize their time to respond to these different missional objectives, then it looks like something more than just keeping an aging infrastructure and an old model of church up. You're actually using those resources for exactly what you're intending to do. So it's just a different angle of view on the finances.
Yeah, because some of it is generational, I think, but some of it is getting inspired about certain things that are going on within your church, and you want to lift those certain outreach organizations up, and you feel like, or I'm the kind of person that I'll just push, pull, or drag. Can't I just push, pull, or drag you like into my way of thinking? Like if I song and dance it enough, if I show you all these different things, don't you want to do this? Because it's like, this is the future. And I just think that that's so important, that it's okay to focus, that really, if that's the core value, then yes, let's focus on it. And then what you had said previously about, let's figure out a way from our endowment to finance that, so then we're freeing up this other money to do that. Then the people that are more financially conservative feel secure that the building that they love, which we're never going to separate that from them, that there's I don't know.
Yeah.
But no, the narrative budget, I think, is an interesting way, but I'm afraid they'd be shocked by a lot of the things, like if you really narrated to them what the budget is.
Your audience, your traditional budget goes to your conservative older parishioners. The narrative budget comes to your new members who are very missionally oriented.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot about that. I call it regional covers. When the Sports Illustrated releases the NFL preview, in the Northeast, Tom Brady's on the cover, and out on the West Coast, Russell Wilson's on the cover. It's the same content, but it's, yeah. So don't be sorry. That's why we're here. St. Thomas similarly had, the mission statement. The strategic process for St. Thomas was wholly different than from the Explorer that we were talking about. It was the place itself is a much larger organization because primarily of the choir. They have the world famous choir of men and boys. The boys go to the choir school, which I mentioned. The choir school falls under the umbrella of the church operating budget, which is curious. So what came out of that strategic planning was, in a way, things we already knew. And this is what I think an aspect of strategic planning that comes into play, for organizations to initiate change is basically, so say we created the Office of Institutional Advancement. And some might think, wait a minute, we're trying to save money. Why are we hiring 3 more positions? But we're able to kind of point and say, well, this is what we learned, and this is where we need to go. And we have a sort of, the experts have weighed in. And in some, that's a very fortunate thing. The biggest thing for me, the takeaway was a simple equation where people like the ministry and the music. And the music doesn't happen without the choir of men and boys, and the boys don't happen without the school. This is not something we can do with an after-school program. They sing 270 services a year. There's an evensong weekly, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Sunday, and at 2 services at 11 and 4. It's a tough game, and they're incredible, and there's no way that could happen. And so now we've determined what the DNA is. We've determined our core value. Our core value is the music and the liturgy practice. So what do we do to ensure that? I think it's back to you now.
Me.
Sure. Sorry.
So this one isn't from either of us. There was going to be 3 of us standing up here, but the 3rd member couldn't make it because of family illness. But they worked on the National Cathedral. They started by, National Cathedral is a little bit different, okay? It has a role beyond the Episcopal Church. But branded the reconciling love of Jesus Christ, Washington National Cathedral is a house of prayer for all people, conceived by our founders to serve as a great church for national purposes. None of us have a church that's for all people in this sense, like the whole of America. And as I said, their graphic artist was way better than ours. They have words to explain what communication excellence and stewardship innovation, serving, deepening, welcoming, communing mean. And those write-ups are very good. What I would say is, what does this actually convey to you? This is a nice graphic with some significant words, but it doesn't go any further. None of the 3 are perfect, terms of different options. But in this day and age where you have to get the message over almost immediately, it needs to be, you look at something and it's a sort of pictorial view of your elevator pitch of, let's make it better. What is Bethesda? Not as an Episcopal church. What is the essence of Bethesda? Okay? Now at the moment it's collective sacramental worship. Going forwards, it's probably going to be about caring for our members, serving the community through outreach, and spreading Christ's teachings through evangelism. Those three things together. And we aren't there yet, and it's probably going to be different from that, but that's the direction in which we're going. So when you're actually doing this in terms of mission and values, you can have a mission statement that's a paragraph, you can have a set of values that are all explained very carefully, and you have a 2-page document. That's okay for about 5% of the population. The other 95% need to just look at something and grasp it. I haven't yet seen one that's really, really good, but that's the direction in which to go. Okay. You again.
Yes. One of the things about the strategic planning process also that I found extraordinary, St. Thomas does not do an annual meeting. We do one at Heavenly Rest, and we have a lot of fun when we do it. So I was, culturally kind of shocked that they didn't have an annual meeting. But what the strategic planning process included were several town hall moments where the consultants would, host and publicize, we're going to have a discussion, we're going to ask some questions, we're going to take questions. And they were standing room only. And this indicates to me, in a lot of ways, again, it's as much whatever it was that we were talking about as the fact that that was happening. People felt like they had a voice. They felt like it was they were being consulted and they were important. And it continues to weave the connection between both congregants and clergy and staff, and also their own particular caring about the place. I'm going to try not to just read what you can read on your own. That's a big thing too, and again we harken back to marketing, and that's a foreign sort of concept for church. But in essence what we're doing is, what is our brand and how can we share it? That's marketing. St. Thomas Choir School is on 58th Street, 1 block north of Carnegie Hall. So how can we take advantage of those kinds of situations? The church itself sits on 53rd and 5th Avenue. More people walk by there in a day than probably walk by Heavenly Rest in a month. So what is it that we're doing? Well, first thing, we need an Office of Institutional Advancement, and we're going to get a communications director.
With the one that just Adam took you through, I was talking before in terms of having tiers of strategic priorities. So these are at the church level, okay? This is Bethesda. So we actually finalised for the next 5 years our strategic priorities for 2020 to 2024. So this is the first year. Like, we had our annual meeting in January. Everybody was told that yes, we've been working on it for a year, and a lot of people had actually participated. And I actually went and sat with every single one of the 64 ministries in terms of their committees and groups and things to actually talk through the process, and then we actually brought them together in bigger and bigger groups until we actually got them. And one was to do preserve and enhance the buildings and grounds, one was to increase endowment funds, and number 2 actually enables number 1. We'll actually focus on the areas where we want to go forward. So again, this is at the church level. So Bethesda has 4, deliver practical outreach, and the words that go with it there. And then spread Christ's teaching. So that's what I was saying, but we are moving from collective sacramental worship to these 2 things here. those two work together in terms of the endowment fund will actually preserve and enhance the buildings and grounds. You have to be really careful doing things like 1 and 2. Because you can end, if you don't do 3 and 4, you can end up like lots of the churches in Europe. They look great, but they're like museums. Okay? Because there's no life. Okay? They're basically dead places in terms of faith and Christianity. What they are is wonderful cathedrals built in the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th centuries that have great stained glass, pretty good art, look really good, but it's like going in and the docents are like tour guides taking you around. And there's almost no interaction in terms of your faith and things like that. So do that, and it's really great, and that's what we're about to do, started the process. But if you're not doing this, then you're not alive, you're not actually attracting people in, you're not actually giving people something to do as part of their faith going forwards. So that's how we came to, this is what we want to do. This is directly out of our mission statement, and this was one of our values, the 8 values was outreach. Both of these actually take us outwards as opposed to being inwards. Okay? So these are church level strategic priorities.
Paul, can you go back to that chart? Can you give a little more flavor of how you got to 3 and 4? In other words, you talked before about the data collection and that process, and I'm sure there was a lot of discussion and maybe some exciting discussion about, you know, getting this far. Can you just talk a little bit about how long it took, and, you know, were there stumbling points, or, you know, how did it all evolve?
Well, we basically tried to look at it and went, we need to look at 3 population groups within the church. We need to look at those who've been here a long time, and what did they perceive of everything. Those that had come sometime in the last 5 years, which we regarded as the newcomers, what did they perceive? And they actually changed the most. In the last 5 years, we as a church have changed a lot, and therefore what people said about the church. And then if someone was leaving, I mean not dying, but leaving, whatever, then what was the reason? That was the most difficult group to actually get honest answers from, because most of them just wanted to leave, and that was the end of the matter. And some actually came up, and we had reasons that I'm not going to go into, but we totally understood what their reason was. I totally disagreed with every single one of their reasons, but we understood where they were going. And it was like, okay, the future of the church is not the people who've been here for 35 years and who are 85, and who are very generous supporters. The future of the church is, in most cases, those that have come in the last 5 years, who are younger, who want to be more involved, have no interest actually in being on the vestry, the finance committee, leadership and governance, audit, all these big fancy committees, which is where a lot of the older people thought they wanted to be, because that's where they got prestige. They could go to their private club and say, oh, I'm the chair of finance at Bethesda. And everybody goes like, very good, stuff like that. But all these new people coming in then start to have an influence on those who had been here a long time, who weren't quite so old. So someone's been here for 40 years, but they're only 60. I actually started changing it, going, wow, these new people, like, we have 120 people in our flower kit. Okay? So we buy flowers in, we don't have a greenhouse, but we used to actually pay shops to actually arrange all the flowers. As a cost-cutting exercise, we actually said, well, why couldn't we just do it ourselves? And it started with 6, and now it's 120 people, 110 ladies and 10 men. I'm yet to see one of the men arranging the flowers. They're usually carrying the big tubs of water and stuff like that, but we're going to get there one of these days. But that is happening because the number and the proportion of the newer people, the last 5 years, is actually changing things. And then it was, what else is going on in the community, what is needed. And so many more people are now actually hands-on with outreach. It was like, people come back and we're getting better at people explaining the stories that they've been part of. I helped this young man for 4 years. He's now at MIT. He's studying engineering, like not an arts degree, the way some people look down their noses at things like that. And it's going really well. And then we must have had 20 people in there, 60, 70 say, can I be a mentor as well? And it's like, yes, definitely. And then we move on, and then we find something else. And the newer people are bringing life, and the people who've been there a long time but aren't the ones that just can't do it physically are actually seeing the change and seeing that this is good for Bethesda. Bethesda is like lifting up in terms of, it's not just faith, it's how we're coming together as people instead of being little cliques.
Do you think that part of that is because you validated the history of the older members of your church by saying, yes, what you did was really, really important, it's why we're here now, and we're going to make sure that we take care of these buildings, this endowment, you have this security blanket, we're done worrying about that now because this is here and this is in place. And that gave them the freedom to be able to even consider the things that the new people were bringing in.
Some of that came from that, and we've been, in terms of our stewardship side of things, we actually decided about 18 months ago that we'd basically flatlined our annual campaign, and we needed a different approach. So we actually started working with Horizon Stewardship and basically saying, okay, this is not fundraising, this is the generosity aspect of your faith. Generosity in spirit, generosity in giving, generosity in helping, like love your neighbor, give your time, talent, and treasure, and things like that. And part of the story that came out of that was that people who built our current church, this is Bethesda 3, which was built in 1925 to 1935, there were 50 people in the church, and they built the church for 600. They weren't building a church for themselves, they were building a church for as it grew. And so one of the storylines that we've been talking about is they paid forward. Now it's our time to take responsibility to pay forward for the people 50 years in the future. So our generosity approach is going like that. And that then fed into what we're actually doing in terms of these things. So we actually have generosity going on. We have renewal works in terms of our faith level. We have the new strategic priorities. But we have about 5 things that have just about got integrated. I'm a volunteer, but I appear to be at Bethesda quite a lot, okay? My paying clients are sort of saying, what are you doing these days, Paul? It's like, okay, I need to go and see them because they pay the bills. But it's like, you can't do this with one thing. And I think that's one of the things that's coming out of this. It's like the new strategic priorities based on the changing people, based on the recognizing the history and what they did, based on doing more in terms of understanding the faith of the people within the church and building that through the stuff that we're doing with renewal works, and everything else. It's all the bits are coming together as one machine that works, whereas one of them wasn't going to get there. And it's a very complex box to unwrap and not break in the process. And we've been very, so we have moved much more slowly than I would ever do in a commercial organization. I've gone in and done financial and operational turnarounds in a company. I can fire 50% of the staff. I go over and take a company of 250 people, and 2 weeks later I fired half of them. And 2 months later I've doubled the productivity of the people that are still there.
You can do that at your church, yeah.
You can't do that in the church, okay?
Right.
And you're going to hear one of the
As much
things.
as you'd like to sometimes, yeah.
But one of our challenges at the moment is we're going to have to put a course together to teach people how to lead lay volunteers. Like lay volunteers as leading lay volunteers as team members, they get it wrong all the time, okay? That causes the staff and the rector and the clergy more problems than anything, because you can't fire them and you can't tell them, you have to ask them. And you have to persuade them. And you actually have to understand why you're going to do that, not you've decided to do it, so we're going to do it. And so we've decided we just actually have to create some sort of training program. Now, whether we actually go outside and get someone to help us or whether we actually do it ourselves, but it's like, okay, I don't have an expert in that, but we use Realm as our computer software for the members. I can look up when I need a lawyer, I've got 43 of them. How many of them are federal prosecutors? 6 federal prosecutors. We've got a legal problem, legal team we can throw at them because absolutely nothing is really good, okay? So that tends to solve those sort of. This sort of problem is a totally different sort of problem, and therefore it's going to be. You're going to have to actually explain to the current lay leaders that they aren't getting it right, even though they are the lay leaders.
Can I just add, we talk a lot about change at pastoral speed. That's what he's talking about, the slowness of it. And it's whoever is, a big component of this, which isn't necessarily strategic planning on the nose, but it's who is doing the messaging. Most often that's going to be the rector and the other clergy. But how engaged are they? And to a certain extent, when we're trying to change things in the generational, I think a lot about triangulation, about the change in pastoral speed and listening and being available to criticism and to concerns, and change is fear of loss, and how are we acknowledging that and still moving forward, because we can't go in and just change off the bat. And the messaging portion it's sort of a human branding where there's repetition. We are, we acknowledge the fact that we're changing, and we're changing at pastoral speed, and if you have a concern, I'm available, or this person. And then that sort of, to me, trickles down into the leadership, and people become assuaged in a way by having different years in which to fill the various things. And then a lot of repetition in messaging, where it's not just like, we're doing this thing, we're talking about it today, and then we never talk about it again until you see a report in 3 months. It's like, no, every component, every facet in which you're reaching out, this is a portion of that messaging. So that's how I think we get to 3 and 4.
Okay. Very good points. Like those. We're going to take a 10-minute break again. So 1:45 by my watch.
All right, I'm done.